let me just start. I'm going to be talking about Elmer Keith and his style of guns and what he did and what he talked about, and things he recommended, things he recommended against, things so yeah. If you don't know who Elmer Keith is, you can go back and just do a search for Elmer Keith. My goodness, he's the guy who created the 44 Magnum. But I've had these books for probably more than 30 years. Six Guns by Keith was very influential on this young man. When I was a young guy and having grown up in Montana, the adventures of a Montana cowboy, how could you not want to read Elmer Keith? Hell, I was there. And then I had, in the 90s, I got both issues, or both volumes of Gun Notes. Go back there, and those were excerpts from when he was writing, and his column was called Gun Notes, and he talked about different things. Each month, you'd get the new magazine, and I think it was Guns and Ammo, I think, and then each month he talked about a different topic. So all of his Gun Notes, great. That right there is a great library in itself. There's probably nobody who was more influential on in me as a young gun guy, young gunsmith, young gun nut than Elmer Keith. When I learned about the Elmer Keith's number 5, I wanted to make my own version of it. If you read he describes what it takes to have a great single action revolver, and I love single actions probably more than any other style of gun is a single action revolver. I made my own version of the number 5. I took a Ruger Blackhawk. I put the Bisley frame on it, and then Elmer Keith talked about the white outline rear sight, and I went in and I tuned up the action, and I put the steel ejector rod housing. He wanted heavier muzzle and things like that. And I even found the white grips to kind of match Elmer Keith's number 5. And he was right on. This Bisley hammer is just when you're, I know I got my finger on the trigger, I understand that. But when you grab and you want to cock with just one hand, it just is a natural feel. That Bisley hammer is probably the single best improvement I did to this gun. I put the hourglass base pin just like on Elmer Keith's number 5. I wanted to be just like Elmer Keith, except my gun's in 357 Magnum. That's what I had at the time. It's not a 44, and it's not a 44 Magnum. It's not a 44 Special. It's 357. That was my choice of caliber. So right there, I disagreed with Elmer Keith. Oh my God, I disagree with Elmer Keith. I chose a 357 Magnum over a 44 Magnum. I'm not out in bear country. I like to shoot 357. But some of the things that he really was a proponent of, he talked about in his writings, that Colt single action Army flat topped. Well, that was the whole reason for me getting a New Frontier. This is Colt. It's a Colt single action Army. This was their adjustable sight flat top version of the Colt single action Army, the Colt New Frontier. One of my favorite guns. It just has a great feel to it. It's a Colt single action Army. How can you say anything bad about it? This is what Keith talked about: the flat top frame and the adjustable sights. He's the reason I ended up getting one. And then Keith talked about that Bisley grip frame. He talked about that. That's the reason I got a 44 Magnum with the Bisley grip frame. This is just, and it does handle the 44 Magnum cartridge very, very well as far as recoil. This thing recoiling in your hands. The Bisley grip frame. That's a big influence from Keith and his number 5. But I do love the feel of that Bisley grip frame that Ruger has come out with. But there are some things, if you go through Elmer Keith's readings and you take everything he said, there's a lot of stuff I disagreed with. Not at first. At first I wanted to be just like him, obviously. But one of the things he talked about was never put checkering on a single action. And you know what? I got these grips checkered, and you know what? I do love the feel of it. I like in recoil how it doesn't move. If I'm doing long range shooting and I, round after round, I don't have to worry about this thing rocking or slipping or rolling in my grip because it's checkered. I keep that same grip over and over, the same sight picture shot after shot. I do like checkered grips on a single action. I know Elmer Keith says never do that. Something I disagreed with Elmer Keith. Oh my goodness. But I really do like the checkered grips on this. The other thing that Elmer Keith talked about, he like asked Bill Ruger to put that squared, trigger guard on what he called the Dragoon frame, for Ruger's Super Blackhawk. And I went out and I bought that just because that's what that's a Ruger's concession to Elmer Keith. I fired it and I tried it for years, and that squared trigger guard just beat the crap out of my fingers. It was very painful. I sold my Ruger Blackhawk, my Super Blackhawk, and then I kind of regretted it afterwards. I said, the only thing I didn't like about it was that it hurt my finger. Everything else about the gun I liked. So I went and got another Super Blackhawk, and I put a Blackhawk grip frame on it. So this has just a regular Blackhawk frame, and this is so much more fun to shoot for me. I can shoot 44 Magnums, and I don't get beat up by that squared trigger guard. I have very, very large hands, and it just didn't fit, and that squared guard just kind of beat me up. So once again, I disagreed with Elmer Keith. I prefer the rounded trigger guard. Still he was hugely influential in my choice of guns, and I tried that long range shooting, so I could be like Elmer Keith, and I copied his holds and his stance and the way he'd sit back with his head on his saddle, and I'd try to imitate that and do some long range shooting, and that's why I think I have so many long barreled single actions, is because I do like to do long range shooting. I do like the adjustable sights. I do like the long barrel. So that's that was a big influence from Keith too. And if you read some of his stuff, it kind of breaks my heart. He talks so much bad about the 30-06. He talked, and this is one of my M1 Garand. This might be my single favorite rifle, and that 30-06 round might be my favorite rifle round. So I disagreed with Elmer Keith. For what I do, for what I shoot and how I shoot, I like that 30-06. He had there's no place for it. He just wrote it off. But for me, I like the 30-06, and I love the Garand rifle. And if you read through his stuff, he had no time for it. He wanted a bigger bore. He wanted large bore, large caliber. And he was doing African safaris and shooting elk, things that I don't do. So for me, there's the old saying, you need to pick your expert. I believe there's nobody you're going to agree with 100%, not on everything. I don't agree with my wife on everything. I agree with her more than anybody else in the world. And as with Elmer Keith, he's, like I said, the most influential gun writer on me when I was a young man. But I don't agree with everything he said. In my video the other day, if you guys are watching this stuff that I put up regularly, I talk about the Craig Jorgensen, and people go, oh no, the expert that I listen to, the guy that I follow, he says Jorgensen. Well, choose your expert. I have friends, their last name is Jorgensen, so it's a Craig Jorgensen. That's how I've seen it written. I've heard it. These guys that I know, that's how they say it. That's how I've been saying it for the last 50 years. And same thing with whether it's six guns, whether it's your coolest, newest autoloader, whether it's a red dot, whether it's a prism or hologram, whatever. Whoever you listen to and they're the expert, go with that. Believe your guy, but you're not going to believe everything. Comes a point where you have to be your own expert. I think I've gotten to that point. I'm the expert of me. I know what I like. I know what feels good to me. That's what I do. Elmer Keith wasn't copying anybody. Why should I copy him? I no doubt I've been influenced by him. There's no doubt. But he didn't copy somebody. He was doing his own thing and being his own man. You should too. Who did Elvis copy? Well, who knows? Elvis was just being Elvis, and he was being himself. I'm not an Elvis impersonator. I'm trying to be myself. Get out, do a little research, increase your knowledge, and then when you get to a certain point where you have enough knowledge, that's when you can make decisions based on fact, based on your knowledge and what's best for you. You can be your own expert. Starting out, listen to advice. But the great thing about advice is it's free. And at some point, you don't have to listen anymore. You can kind of do your own thing. But do that once you've gotten to the point where you know a lot. My rant, okay, I don't agree with everything Elmer Keith said. I know that's, to some people, that's blasphemy. But at the same time, you got to be your own expert.